What's up, everyone? Prague here. So I'm just coming off a reread of one of my favorite books of all time, Dune by Frank Herbert. I sort of read it in anticipation of the movie that's coming in 2020, which I am overwhelmingly excited for. I can't wait. And also just because I haven't read it in a while and I wanted to go back to it. I think it's been maybe 4 or 5 years since I read it last. Actually, I think longer. Like I read it in like middle school, and now I'm in college. So, um, yeah, I've read the first three books. Um, Even the first time I read it, I really liked Dune. I think it's my second favorite book of all time, behind A Song of Ice and Fire, behind that like whole series. Um, I read Dune Messiah, and I read Children of Dune, and I really liked Dune Messiah. I didn't like Children of Dune as much. Um, so keep that in mind as I talk about what I'm going to talk about here. So my biggest, realization after reading Dune, with the knowledge of like what happens in Dune Messiah and what's talked about in Dune Messiah, is that Paul isn't the hero, right? Um, he, well, it's sort of complex, right? Because he has this prescience, and he decides whether it's the right decision or not that initiating this jihad, which is going to kill, I think it's like 61 billion people or something over the course of 12 years across the universe, is the best course of action. That's what's going to give him not only revenge on the Harkonnens, but what's going to sort of end some of the injustices under the Padishah Emperor. Um, that became a lot more apparent to me because Frank Herbert doesn't come right out and say, "Hey, Paul's gonna like be the result of a bunch of people dying, and like maybe this isn't the best choice for Paul." Um, he just has Paul, from Paul's perspective, him saying the terrible purpose over and over, right? And that I think is sometimes lost on readers. A lot of the readers that think Paul is like bland or don't understand like his point as the protagonist. Um, Going through Dune, knowing more about Frank Herbert and knowing about Dune Messiah really makes that a lot more obvious. And so I would implore people that read the first book of Dune to read Dune Messiah because it opens up the I think the intended interpretation of the first book once you read the second one. Um, let's see. Another thing that I realized, some really good passages and chapters that I didn't latch onto like I did that I latched onto this time that I didn't the first time. Really good passage in the chapter where Paul like does a scrimmage fight, a training fight against Gurney Halleck. Really good passage from Gurney Halleck's perspective at the end of that chapter, where he sort of recalls his sister who died in the Harkonnen slave pits or something, um, and says, "If wishes were fishes, we'd all cast nets." And then he says, "How strange that is, think about when we're going to Arrakis, where none of that stuff exists." That passage is so good because it happens right before all the horrible stuff happens to House Atreides, right? And it gives you this look into Gurney Halleck, who seems to be this pretty upbeat character, right? Playing the balisette, singing all these songs, um, and a pretty joking, like jokes around a lot, pretty jovial guy. And then it gives you this heart wrenching, like emotional side to him. Another chapter that I latched onto, or passage that I really latched onto, was Dinner Party, which reminded me a lot of the beginning of the second third of Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke, where after all this like sort of condensed story, you're thrown into the future with a bunch of new characters at this dinner party, and they all have different things to say and different motivations and everything. And that was by far my favorite part of Childhood's End. This chapter is a lot like that, right? It gives you Lingard Butte, gives you the Guildbank representative. It gives you a lot more Liet-Kynes. It gives you the stillsuit manufacturer. It gives you so many new characters, and all these little political and uh, scheming and all this stuff. And I found myself, this chapter really stuck with me on the reread. It's an awesome chapter. I love this idea of like the dinner party and a ton of new characters and sort of a political undercurrent. Um, and on that note, favorite characters. The first time I read Dune, my favorite characters at the end of the book were Liet-Kynes and Feyd-Rautha, and maybe even Jessica. On the reread, that's kind of changed and kind of stayed the same. So, as I said, Gurney Halleck, after reading again, he is definitely one of my favorite characters in the book. Um, Liet-Kynes, still one of my favorite characters. I mean, the guy's a beast. Um, Jessica, not as much anymore. Um, the thing with Jessica is she does kind of like screw over the Bene Gesserit because of how much she loves Leto, which is I think what drew me to her first. But she also does some like questionable stuff with training Paul and sort of conditioning him to be the Kwisatz Haderach. It's like, what did she really bear a son because of Leto, or did she really want to be the mother of the Kwisatz Haderach, right? Like she definitely has some prideful moments. I'm recalled to one statement, probably the first statement that really, or first passage in the book, I guess, that really caused me to question my like for Jessica. When she's like talking to the Shadow Mapes and she says, "Oh, I'm the Duke's concubine," and she says she can't help being prideful when she says it. I definitely think there was a sort of prideful reason for her giving birth to Paul, um, which really makes me question sort of the integrity of her character, and whether I really want to like this character or not. Um, and Feyd-Rautha on the reread, I'm not sure why I liked him so much. I still find myself for some reason attracted to his character, whether it's him saying like calling his dad old monster and being so sly and manipulative and this I realized more when the Fenrings are talking to each other, and I think it's Lady Fenring who says if he was raised in, under the Duke, maybe he wouldn't have turned out so bad. And this is someone who had a lot of potential to be a really good ruler. Um, and also this idea, that he might have been the Kwisatz Haderach. I don't know if that's really fleshed out. I know it's fleshed out with Hasimir Fenring. I think I got that mixed up with Feyd-Rautha. I thought they implied that he could have been it, but he very well could have been it if his bloodline was one worth preserving. So yeah, I still sort of like Feyd-Rautha, but he's probably dropped down on my tier list. Um, and he's still pretty like cruel and sadistic, right? Um, but it would have been interesting to see what would have happened if Feyd won the knife fight. Yeah, I'd say that's how my favorite characters changed around in this book. Stilgar is also a beast. Um, yeah, and then on the topic of Liet-Kynes, this was sort of interesting. I don't know. This might be like just me on the reread. I think it's just me. But Paul kind of screws over Liet-Kynes, and this is really where Paul started to come off as an antagonist, not an antagonist, but like not an ideal protagonist. And maybe this is just me, but near the end of the book, when Paul is talking to the Padishah Emperor, he starts talking about terraforming the planet, and he mentions, yeah, we're gonna get some water going on Arrakis, but we're also gonna need some desert because we need the spice. I need the spice. Uh, and this is sort of like a giant stab in the back to Liet-Kynes, right? I don't think Paul is that invested. I mean, maybe I need to finish rereading Dune Messiah, but I don't think Paul is that invested in sort of the thing that he promised the Fremen and the thing that he promised Liet-Kynes. Um, which, if that's true, Paul's kind of a dick, right? Like, he did all this just, in such a manipulative manner. And maybe you can blame some of that on the prescience, but I don't know. On the reread, that really stuck out to me. All right, one last thing that I realized on the reread is when Jessica drinks the water of life and gets the Reverend Mother's memories, it's a lot like the analeptic Alzabo from the Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. And on that note, it's a lot like Bran in Song of Ice and Fire. I guess in Game of Thrones it hasn't happened in Song of Ice and Fire yet, but this sort of idea of getting absorbing memories through some like supernatural means. Um, and I think Dune and the Book of the New Sun go a little bit farther than that, and it's you get the memories, but not only do you get the memories, you sort of become that person. That person becomes a part of you. The Reverend Mother becomes part of Jessica. Thekla becomes part of Severian. And I don't really have anything profound to say about this. I just think it's interesting, that this is a popular idea in sci-fi. This sort of melding of people. Just a random thought. Anyway, that's all I can think of right now on the reread, but it was definitely worth rereading Dune. Um, it remains it in Dune Messiah as my second favorite book or book series of all time. Um, yeah, awesome books. I'm looking forward to Dune 2020. Super excited. Probably make some videos on that. But until then, I'll see you in the next one.